So I know it's been a long day. I know how tiring it is to actually think all day. You would think that sitting down would be relaxing, but thinking is action, and so we are all tired. This is the last presentation of the day, and Roger asked me to introduce both myself and our speaker. So here we go. I'm Jill Stauffer. I wrote a book called Ethical Loneliness that's about how those of us who try our best to listen sometimes fail to hear what those who have been harmed are actually trying to say, and the joy we might get from learning to do better. I teach at Haverford College. That's all you really need to know because I'm not the speaker today, Marilyn Simon is. Marilyn is a Shakespeare scholar who teaches English literature at University of Manitoba in Canada. She earned her PhD from the University of Toronto. She's been published in the Hedgehog Review, Unherd and Quillette, and is currently working on a book titled Submission: How Falling in Love with Shakespeare Made Me a More Joyful Woman, Wife, and Lover. You can learn more about either of us from looking at the bios in your program. And so let's get to it. Today, Marilyn is here to talk to us about the joy of inequality in love and marriage. After that, I'll say a few things, and then we'll have a little bit of back and forth, and then we'll open it up to questions. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. When I was 17, I read C.S. Lewis's novel, That Hideous Strength. There were parts of it I loved and parts of it that I didn't understand, but one part in particular struck me as the most outlandish, probably because in a strange novel, it felt the strangest to modern ears. It is a conversation between a young wife, Jane, and Ransom, a man who communes with angels. Married to a scholar and a PhD student herself, Jane feels unhappy in her marriage. Her husband, Mark, feels similarly unquiet and disenchanted. Jane explains as best she can how she feels about her marriage. "I thought love meant equality," she said, "and free companionship." Ransom responds, "Equality is not the deepest thing, you know." "I always thought that's just what it was," Jane says. "I thought that it was in their souls that people are equal." "You were mistaken," he said gravely. "That is the place where they are least equal. Equality is medicine, not food." Jane objects, "But surely in marriage..." Worse and worse. You can imagine Ransom shaking his head. "It's not your fault. They never warned you. No one has ever told you that obedience, humility, is an erotic necessity. You are putting equality just where it ought not to be." Equality, not in marriage. An impossibility and an outrage. Surely this, I thought, as a young woman, is Lewis speaking as a man. And not only that, but a man of his time. The book was published in 1946 after all, and since then we've come a long way. Accordingly, my first marriage was a union of equals. Neither one of us would have, consciously at least, put ourselves above the other. Neither would have offered, much less demanded, obedience, humility, submission, or surrender. We were friends. There was no hierarchy. There was also no erotic spark, no desire for the other, save for the most basic gratification on his part, and on mine, an obligation to have a healthy relationship. Sex was a duty, and because of that, it was degrading. The depravity of my first marriage began to reveal itself in how completely unfeminine I was becoming. At first, I welcomed this, The loss of my femininity was something I had desired, I thought. Weren't we moving towards a genderless equality? Were not independence and equality our goals? And to that end, socially constructed gender roles something to eschew and leave behind? What use and what good was femininity anyway? But something more than mere daintiness was ebbing away from me. I was losing the capacity to be not exactly dependent and not exactly vulnerable, but submissive in a way that would have been a right response to true authority. And I began to grieve this loss. I longed for the chance to unburden myself of myself, not of the adult responsibilities I shouldered, nor of my own independence, but of the place I had assigned myself at the center of my own life. I wanted to give my entire soul and my entire body to a lover. I wanted to be cherished as belonging to another. But to make this sacrifice of my own centrality, my beloved would have to be above me and not my equal. It is a paradox. To surrender myself to an equal would be to lose the very thing I wanted to give away. But to surrender myself, to give willingly my self-concern to a man above me who was worthy of such an honor, would be to elevate myself as well as my lover in the very act of surrendering myself. He would himself grow in stature as I gave myself to him, and I would become enlarged for giving such a gift. There is plenty of cultural messaging which suggests that femininity is weakness and submission defeat. But without a chance to give myself as a gift, I was unable to feel myself to be a gift. I belonged to myself, but I longed to belong to another. Belonging to myself was lonely. What began as a quiet sense of dissatisfaction in me soon began to fester into something more poisonous. I realized that I was unfeminine because he was unmanly. To give him myself, my full self, erotic and obedient and full of love, he would have to be able to take the offering in hand and cherish it as an adornment to his masculinity. The more authority a man held, the more I longed to be taken in hand as his own. Instead, cynicism was becoming my default attitude. There are two kinds of hardness in a person. One that creates a shell, an exoskeleton around a soft core, and another where hardness moves inward, where one's core itself begins to thicken and ossify, and the space for softness grows smaller. For me, and I am grateful for this, it was the former that I felt occurring. In a self-protective way, I formed an armor around myself. As it became stronger, my inner self became softer. But the softening was painful to me. It grew into an ache that I felt had no hope of comfort. A marriage is always political. It is the state that ratifies the contract and the state that can dissolve it. But within a marriage, politics might be unseated. Love is incomprehensible to power. Love is joyfully self-giving. Its interest is in the other's good. To be concerned with equality makes one vigilant for infractions. And this posture is not conducive to joy. There is no lightness nor freedom. Equality is self-regarding. Things must be fair. This is not just about chores, finances, child-minding duties, and sleep-in days, though concerns of daily life surely factor into our sense of equality in a marriage. But there is a political as well as an existential apprehension around the equality of partners. Neither can be above or below the other. A score has to be kept to ensure equality. Unless one wants constant conflict, one's sense of unfairness can quietly move into resentment. This is when the hardness moves inward and makes one feel alone, even when in the presence of one's spouse. Arendt closes her magisterial work, The Origins of Totalitarianism, with a reflection and a warning about loneliness. She writes, "Solitude requires being alone, whereas loneliness shows itself most sharply in the presence of others." There is maybe nothing that is more demoralizing than feeling lonely with one's own spouse, where one hopes to find comfort and companionship. In Orwell's 1984, his protagonist Winston describes the hollowness of his party marriage. His wife, Catherine, was, and this is a quote, "good thinkful," meaning naturally orthodox, incapable of thinking a bad thought. Everything she did was centered on her duty to the party, including sex, which she called every week, "We must do our duty to the party." For both Orwell and for Arendt, this is to quote Arendt again, "The iron band of total terror leaves no space for private life." That's the end of the quote. A focus on equality in marriage, bringing the logic of politics into the private life world of marriage, erases that private life world. There are many reasons why a marriage falls apart. It is very likely that a marriage based on friendship and mutuality is something of the norm. Husbands and wives often feel like domestic co-workers and not lovers. Much of the time, these marriages last. Sometimes they're even deeply content. But sometimes, the lack of tenderness grows into resentment, and that was the case for my first marriage. My husband began to want a submissive wife in an effort to realize his own masculinity. He demanded that I surrender parts of myself to him. The more he did so, the further away from submissive I became. It enraged him. There is a passage in Charlotte Bronte's great love story, Jane Eyre, where Rochester realizes that his beloved Jane will not marry him because, turns out, he's already married. "Never," Rochester says as he grinds his teeth, "never was anything at once so frail and so indomitable. A mere reed she feels in my hand, and he shook me with the force of his hold. I could bend her with finger and thumb. And what good would it do if I bent, if I uptore, if I crushed her? Consider that I," he says directly to her while looking at her. This is Rochester again. "Consider the resolute, wild, free thing looking out of it, defying me, with more than courage, with a stern triumph. Whatever I do with its cage, I cannot get at it, the savage, beautiful creature. If I tear, if I rend the slight prison, my outrage will only let the captive loose. Conqueror I might be of the house, but the inmate would escape to heaven before I could call myself possessor of its clay dwelling place. And it is you, spirit, with will and energy and virtue and purity that I want, not alone your brittle frame. Of yourself you could come with me with soft flight and nestle against my heart if you would. Seized against your will, you will elude me like the grasp of an essence. You will vanish ere I inhale your fragrance. Oh, come, Jane, come." I've quoted Rochester's speech in its entirety so that we can see the threat of violence that underlies his feelings. The desperation to possess that part of a woman which is wild, savage, free, can lead to brutality. I know. But the desired part of her, the part that can only be possessed if offered and given, will be farther away from him than ever, and she will look on him with contempt. His manliness will be mocked. Given willingly, however, Jane's love not only causes Rochester great joy, but overrules him entirely. He says again to her, "I never met your likeness, Jane. You please me and you master me. You seem to submit, and I like the sense of pliancy you impart. And while I am twinning the soft silken skein round my finger, it sends a thrill up my arm to my heart. I am influenced, conquered, and the influence is sweeter than I can express, and the conquest I undergo has a witchery beyond any triumph I can win." Jane submits to Rochester because he is commanding and self-possessed. She desires these qualities in him. She desires his authority over her, even his seeming indifference to her. Yet the power of Jane's submission to her beloved isn't merely that her pliancy moves her master's heart. It is that his heart, too, becomes tender and soft and submissive to her. In giving herself to him, he becomes both more masculine and more feminine, just as she becomes more feminine and, as conqueror, more masculine. A woman's self given in love sees the two become not merely one, but somehow, if this were possible, one squared, one to the power of one. A man understands, shares in, and loves more of what is feminine in his lover. She loves and shares in more of what is masculine in him. In his strange and little-known poem, The Phoenix and the Turtle, Shakespeare describes the union of lovers. There's a quote from it. "So they loved, as love in twain, had the essence but in one. Two distincts, division none. Number there in love was slain." They are one, and yet somehow distinctly two. Lovers become more themselves and more each other, more distinct and more unified, more male and more female. No one is quite as feminine as a man conquered by love. He becomes tender and nurturing. And no one quite as masculine as a woman who is beloved. She is ruler. She rules by surrendering. But it is wrong to think of this relationship in terms of gaining or losing power. Love is both a paradox and the most benevolently ordered hierarchy. A hierarchy of power leads to brutality, but one built on love leads to bliss. This is why Shakespeare described it as a wonder. As C.S. Lewis describes Jane's confusion around her marriage, so too does he describe Mark's, her husband's. That hideous strength closes with the husband returning to his wife. For all its theological heft, that hideous strength is really a love story. Mark begins to see himself as having been painfully, shamefully boorish. He is approaching his wife's cabin after being estranged from her for some time, and this is his thoughts as he approaches her cabin. He thought of his clumsy importunity, and the thought would not go away. Inch by inch, all the lout and clown and clodhopper in him was revealed to his own reluctant introspection. The coarse male boor with horny hands and hobnailed shoes and beefsteak jaw, not rushing in, for that can be carried off, but blundering, sauntering, stumping in where great lovers, knights, and poets would have feared to tread. Mark is ashamed of his own unworthiness. So here's the text again. An image of Jane's skin, so smooth, so white, or so he now imagined it, that a child's kiss might make a mark on it, floated before him. How had he dared? Her driven snow, her music, her sacrosanctity, the very style of all her movements. And how had he dared? And dared too, with no sense of daring, nonchalantly in careless stupidity. The very thoughts that crossed her face from moment to moment, all of them beyond his reach, made him, had he but the wit to see it, a hedge about her, which such as he should never had the temerity to pass. Yes, yes, of course, it was she who had allowed him to pass it, perhaps in luckless, misunderstanding pity. And he had taken advantage of that noble error in her judgment, had behaved as if he were native to that fenced garden and even its natural possessor. So here is an erotic wisdom that feminism may have forgotten and egalitarianism eliminates. Men, we want you to dare. We desire for you to approach us with daring, with the sense that you are doing something courageous and momentous. We love the daring within you, the lover's kiss that is a risk, a command. We want to submit to your daring, to grant you the thing you risk for, and we want to do this because you've taken a risk. This cannot be accomplished under conditions of equality, nor within an erotic cosmology that privileges mere consent. For then there is no risk, it's just an agreement. Mark's shamefacedness is a fitting response, but it is only fitting if Jane remains, in a real sense, above him before she submits to him. Love is aristocratic, but it isn't always clear who is mistress or master.
All right. So I appreciate the courage it takes to question the received wisdom that equality is what makes a relationship sexy. I agree that it's important for a self to know and decenter itself, as you say, to unburden the self of itself. My way of thinking about this is very different from yours, but I see what you're aiming at. I also see what you mean when you say that a too strict concern for equality that looks for infractions or spend times measuring equal portions is not compatible with the parts of love that refuse power. Love isn't always fair, and if you expect it to work that way, you probably don't understand what you want. But my way of thinking about this is, like I said, also very different from yours, so I have a couple of questions. The first thing I want to say is that I'm from San Francisco, and so you're never going to find me kink-shaming anyone. I believe that every consenting adult should pursue pleasure in whatever form it takes for them or her or him. It might be strange that that's the first thing I say, since what Marilyn has been talking about is submission in a patriarchally coded heterosexual relationship. And it may seem that there's no kink here, but I do think that that's what this is. A kink is a bend. And yes, usually it leans towards something non-conventional, which is why you might think I'm on the wrong track. But often, a kink also sexualizes something that is not on its own sexual. And I don't think power relationships are, on their own, innately sexual. So like I said, this is the kink of submission. And kinks are fine. Go get that pleasure for yourself. Go for the joy. So I'm going to pose some questions that might help me understand better where the edges of what you're theorizing reside. My first question is, does the story you are telling have to be as binary as it is? You say we've got feminine and masculine or genderless equality, but you know, it's 2025, right? Like, would opening this up to a spectrum rather than a binary help us understand what's at stake in offering our true selves to others? Because there's a wide range of expression of gender and sexuality out there. So that's one.
That's, like you said, I'm telling us one story, and there's many stories. So that's totally fine for other people to express themselves in various different ways, and I'm not here to gainsay that at all. But there is also a binary that is, for me, hard to evade, that there's male and female, and most people fall somewhere within male and female. So I don't know, I don't see this as being a controversial statement, even though some might see it as being that. I think I am talking about pleasure and kink, but talking about like loving somebody more than you love yourself, which is an enlargement of yourself. So, I mean, in a marriage, there is no safe word, really. So to talk about it in terms of kink, like I know what you're saying, but it sort of degrades what is actually really sacred about marriage in some way, to me. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I thought that might be what you would say. I don't agree.
No, it's fair.
So here's, I'll pursue it a little further. I myself don't find authority sexy. I understand that others do, but I don't. However, I do think that I can give myself to another in ways that transcend concern with equality. I also am married. I do think it matters that I'm not the center of the universe, but here's the thing. I wouldn't call that submission. I'd call it being human.
Yeah, lovely.
So it seems to me that calling it submission buys into a system where domination is the main structure. And again, if you like to be dominated, that's fine. But a system that has domination as its main feature is going to be uncomfortable, to say the least, for a lot of people. So here's the question that's behind this. Do you give too much to a system that is the cause of a problem when you say that what you want or what you do is submission? What I mean is, if we stopped believing that the self always comes first, would we need to call giving ourselves to others submission? Isn't giving ourselves to others just a requirement of being human?
I mean, I like this idea very much. In fact, I mean, I think we sort of agree. In some ways, we talk about it in different terms. Submission to wrong authority or to power or to domination is certainly not what I'm interested in. There is a submission to somebody that you love, your beloved, which is very different from a system of patriarchal authority even if I'm a woman and my husband's a man. So this isn't submission to patriarchal authority or to domination. It is a submission to my beloved who also loves me. So to put it in these political terms, and maybe submission is triggering, and of course I'm kind of trying to be a little provocative here, but love in this way dissolves these power dynamics entirely. So they're not in play at all. And it's actually really radical for me to think about that so much of our civilization is based on marriage. I mean, we have legal reasons for this, and there's property involved, but the marriage and the family is really the foundation of so much of civilization. And that within this relationship, power can be dissolved through the act of love and mutual submission, which is totally not the same as domination. That is not at all what I'm talking about. Is like an antidote to political power that can encroach even upon the domestic space and the space of the husband and wife or family in their domestic sphere. And so when you have this kind of place where you don't do, as Winston's wife in 1984 does, right think. So when you don't have right think as part of your sort of intimate, loving relationship, you're really radically dissolving power. As much as some people might think, you're just submitting to patriarchal authority and patriarchal power, that's only what it looks like from the outside. It's not that at all. Does that make sense?
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that you've limited what you're talking about to marriage, but there's something about the way that you made the argument that doesn't allow me to limit it that way. I can't hear it that way. There's a couple other things I wanted to say, but I want to leave time for others to speak. So I'll just say one more thing, and that is the line towards the end when you say, "Men, we want you to dare." I have to say something. First of all, sure, if I'm straight, then sure, maybe I may want some men in some settings to dare. It can be thrilling. It can also be thrilling to be the one who dares. But truly, a defining feature of my life has been men daring way too much of the time, and then not walking away when I wanted them to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I hear something like that, I'm like, oh, hell no.
Women also have to be daring to give a swift no or a turn away quickly, right? So of course you have a boldness too.
So many swift no's in my life that just were
Same.
absolutely ignored. So anyway, and here's another thing about living in patriarchy. I'm about to turn 60, which means that men don't dare with me anymore. And here's an irony, that misogyny means that I can be relieved to be old so that I don't have to be bothered. So take that how you will.
Yeah.
That part of your argument, I was just like I've already expressed. Oh, hell no.
No, I appreciate it.
But we've got some hands. How about back there? Back there first. And then
This is
red sweatshirt second.
This is exactly what I was
Second.
aiming for. Perfect.
No, all the way in the back. Yeah, you'll be third, okay? Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, because I have here what you said, we love that there.
Sure, I can.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to know your thoughts on saying things like, we love the there within you, the lover's kiss that is a risk, a command, in a college or a university where we know that women are harassed and abused and raped constantly. So I would like to know more. I'm not as interested in your argument, but the location that you chose to express that argument.
So, I mean, this is a short talk designed to start a conversation and actually bring a very different picture of joy into things. Because again, I'm not trying to talk about power and domination. I'm trying to say this is joy. This is free. It's actually very freeing. So, first of all, I mean, just to speak plainly, men have to read the room and not intrude where it's not a welcome thing. But sometimes, and I also have teenage daughters, and so this is not merely academic for me. And my teenage daughters have many of their teenage friends in my house all the time. So I'm very much sort of dialed in to these concerns of young women. One of the complaints of the teenage girls that come through my house is that they're not sort of being valued highly enough. So the guys have sort of toxic swagger or whatever it is. But that's not the same as a man really or a young man sort of putting himself out there by saying first, like, I really like you, right? So I don't mean a man forcing himself on you. That would be really gross and creepy, and not to mention illegal. So that's not what I'm talking about. But this sense of like, I don't want just to hook up. I sort of want to be courted and pursued, and for him to risk himself, risk rejection, is what I meant by that. Does that make sense? Sort of? Yeah, and I mean, guys have to also take some own. I'm not speaking about man's experience here because I'm not one. But I think we can also realize, like, a lot of guys have the capacity to realize if their interest is not being reciprocated, and then they can just walk away. And I think that's actually the norm. I know a lot of teenage guys too, because of the life world of my house.
Okay, red sweatshirt is second.
It's very pink.
Oh, sorry.
Which I had to say. Hi. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths while I say this, because I am a little frustrated.
Okay.
And particularly, I think a lot of it comes through the assertion that you're not trying to talk about power. And to be real, I heard that very clearly in what you read. I heard that you weren't trying to talk about power, and yet power smacked through everything that you were reading. That power is present in the delineation, the expectation that there are two genders and the others are not actually recognized. When you say things like we, claiming things for other women that they want of cis straight male partners, that there's class involved in terms of what you're reading and what you're reading upon the relationships and putting them in concert and connection with the story that you are telling of yourself. I hear the invitation to consider kink, which is about expectations, powers, consent, and getting your pleasure in the way that you want to. And as a married person, as a deeply devoted married person, as a person who's been in multiple different types of relationship structures and is now in a very monogamous relationship and kind of boring because we have an 8-year-old, I still have a safe word with my husband, right? So these things that we're talking about, like, are actually queering the relationships, about actually looking at multiple different ways of being, can be invited in to the consideration of how you actually want a partner to be, but to claim it as for the thing that we want of all men, how we want men to behave, cis straight men particularly, right, to behave upon women, completely removes the actual, first off, the power that you have to be able to make that claim upon on behalf of other women, and that those are the relationships that are had, those are the relationship structures that you desire and therefore are asking for the multitude and not for yourself. And so I would invite a deeper power lens that might assist in actually understanding your positionality to what you want of your partners in a world where there are multiple different types of marriages, again, married to a man, not to a woman, as a trans person who also has been in relationships as a woman with men, as a woman with women, as a person who presents like this with women, and as a person who presents like this who mostly dates trans or cis men, that there are multiple different ways that we can be in relationships, and to actually just invite that into your perspective and your scope, and how power then comes through the relationships, regardless if you're trying to have them. It's still present because we live in a society where it is everywhere, and it's everything that actually creates who we are and how we are taught to be in relationship with each other.
That was fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That was great. I had a number of thoughts. One of them just went away. Oh, this is okay. There are many people who don't, for whom discussions of positionality, etc., don't even show up in their daily life at all. So these are, I'm talking about non-academic, non sort of cerebral, institutional elites. And so I'm not, and I kind of align myself more with just regular, ordinary. I garden, I look after my kids, and I think, like, I think what you said is very beautiful, that there are many expressions of this kind of thing. I agree with that.
They're asking you to recognize that you're a white woman.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I mean, but that's what you're refusing to do right now.
Okay, I'm a white woman. Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe we should gather a couple of comments. This gray sweatshirt is next, and then this gentleman over here.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say that I totally respect that submission is good for you in your marriage, and I think it's totally up to the person, whatever feels good for them. I think also, as a girl, I'm 17 years old, it feels, very,
Is that okay if I ask?
Of course.
Well, I'm trying to understand like your point of view because I haven't really heard it before. Like I've grown up I'm 18, but I guess it's just like it's hard for me to understand. Like I guess this is more just a question on how you yourself like have these thoughts and are kind of okay with them. But do you ever feel like guilt for the fact that this is kind of like I guess I'm not going to phrase this right, and I understand that it's appealing, like a feeling of like being wanted and like needed by someone, but do you ever feel like you're disrespecting yourself by having that set? And I understand that it's in love, but I get it more if you're talking about, I don't know, I just like, do you ever feel like it's, as a woman, like do you feel bad? I don't mean it like
So I fully understand this, and in fact, in my experience, is the opposite. There is, for me, a very different line between being a public-facing woman in the world and in a private home world. And the private home world is governed by love, where you can lay down these concerns of power. So when you have children, you realize you love the children more than you love yourself. And parents might sort of have the illusion with your 8-year-old, you have the illusion that you're in a position of sort of authority, but in fact, everything you do is to serve and love the child, right? So it's a bit, and you grow, you find parts of your inner self that appear to you when you submit to somebody else's needs. So I think the word, it's submission that is being very hard. It doesn't mean defeat. And in fact, you are very strong when you sort of give of yourself to somebody. Yeah.
I just think as a young girl, I find it so disheartening to think that you think that as a woman that I have to give myself up and waste the gift that is my humanity that was given to me the day I was born, to become an object to serve someone else. I think it's also upsetting how you responded to that person's question and saying that you're a normal person, you're not an academic, when queer people are everywhere. I'm a queer person myself. I will never grow up wanting a man to approach me and to be objectified in such a way. It's so hurtful to me. And just also to spread that thinking around and say it's what all women want.
You're right.
I think it's extremely harmful.
I don't want to say this is what all women want, and I'm sorry if you felt that way. And I apologize so what I'm trying to do in some way is to talk about relationships, sexual loving relationships, in a way apolitically. So, but it is
love.
Yeah.
Your love. It's not political. It's just love.
Yes, it is just love. So in love, to submit to somebody you love is not to diminish my humanity. It is enlarging of my humanity. And it isn't, I feel sad, maybe this is dark times, but I feel sad that there seems to be such an allergic reaction to this possibility that within a loving relationship, this idea is so painful.
So let me interject for a moment. I want to thank you for your bravery in telling us so honestly, like, yeah, just like, and I also want to thank you for sticking up for other people who have spoken. I want us, we have 10 minutes left. I feel like there's that there's ways in which what Marilyn is trying to do is perhaps being a little bit misunderstood. As you know, I have my own criticisms. I was able to read this and think about it for a while before I got here. But I also think that maybe, Marilyn, you can take this and think about how to tell the story in a way where these types of misunderstandings don't happen going forward. Yeah. But there are some questions on this side of the room that we haven't gotten to.
You guys,
okay.
In 10 minutes, everybody can get a much-needed drink. So
okay,
it's
wait,
okay.
All right. So here's what I propose. I'm standing up so that you'll listen to me. I will point to people, and they will, in succession, speak, so that we can gather as much as we can, and then just leave a couple of minutes for Marilyn at the end. Does that sound fair? We'll fit in as many as we can. You said you want to help. Is that? I think you probably need a mic because this is also on. Oh, okay. Okay. Students, okay. Where's the microphone person? Just hand it to a student and we'll.
Hi, I'm Zola. I'm a 17-year-old girl who also identifies as a homosexual. And to see you give this very binary portrayal of marriage and not talk at all about any other sort of relationship that isn't a heterosexual one is, one, extremely demoralizing, and then also, in the state of our world, in these dark times, my right of marriage and to be able to marry is not certain at all. And so that, to hear you talk about that, it was just, I think, really scary for me. And then also, one thing that's really, I'm struggling with understanding in your sort of argument is there's such a long history of submission, of women submitting to man in ways that are incredibly harmful, and women, like The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and women being seen as objects, and sort of, it's hard to reconcile what you're saying with that, with the historical connotations of women submitting to man, and also trad wives. And there's this new sort of thing that's coming up with this sort of tradition of, you know, women being these homeowners and submitting and not working. And I guess I just want you to clarify your thoughts on that and how you're going to address like the historical connotations behind what you're saying.
So thanks. And first of all, I'm not.
Is it okay if we gather a few?
Sure. I just want to say very quickly. I understand the domination of a sort of man in a patriarchal system. I tried to sort of explain, like, I get this, that I lived through this for 14 years with my first marriage. So I am not here to ignore that, and in fact, I wanted to be very vulnerable and say, I actually understand this quite well from the inside. But that doesn't mean that every kind of man-woman marriage that orders itself through a kind of mutual submission where it's, I don't know if it's unequal, but it's mutually unequal. at different times. So does that, I don't know if sometimes, it's not always clear, as I said, who's mistress, who's master. It's a bit of a difference. So I tried to address that. I take that to heart, and I understand that very well. This is different. It's about love.
Hi. Okay. I'm going to skip past the part where I say I understand that you're giving your individual perspective, because we've heard that from everyone so far, and I put my name on that as well.
Sure.
But what I want to bring up is more, I guess, tying this back to philosophy and what we've been talking about here at the conference, about the theory of cultural hegemony by Antonio Gramsci. And the idea that, well, yes, this is a perspective that you can have, and you are perfectly free with yourself and any consenting person to do what you want. There is a increasing propensity for this type of relationship to be promoted in the public sphere in a way that is supposed to, or at least, the intention of putting things in the public sphere is to present it to others and to garner reaction and attention towards this. And I think the aspect that I'm feeling, and I'm tentatively going to say that there may be some agreement in the room for this, but I don't want to categorize, is that this is promoting something which is already the default in our society. And you want to speak of it apolitically, but I respectfully disagree that the bedroom can be an apolitical space, in the sense that there is an aspect of the way that our society works outside the bedroom that we take back, and that the joy of submission, and the reason that people who I know who enjoy submission enjoy it, is because it allows them to lose control in a world where the remainder of their life is independent, and the remainder of their life is them spending time worried about things of control and controlling their own life and obsessing with things, and they're able to, with a loving partner, decouple from that. But in speaking with it apolitically, I guess this may be an incorrect assumption, and maybe that's where this misunderstanding is coming from, but I am coming in with the presumption of the ordinary, quote unquote, or default understanding of what a traditional relationship would look like, and how we operate in our current understanding of how the world is still patriarchal. That if a woman walks around and is oppressed or approached unwantedly during her day, then what aspect of that comes home and then is, okay, well, now the proper thing to do is to continue to submit and to continue to not exercise control over my life, because that is how I can feel most joy, is by surrendering, not just in my daily life and not putting up a fight against this, but then also coming home and surrendering. And I get that you're not bringing that in with what you're talking about, so I don't want to blame you personally, but I think that this is contributing to a larger aspect of internet culture that has been going around, of people promoting this and promoting this sort of lifestyle as a full package rather than just the aspect of submission in the bedroom. I've been talking for way too long.
Jump in quickly. It occurs to me that when you speak of a certain rigidity of the genderless equality, you're invoking the crisis of vulnerability. Very often I've found myself thinking, when you speak of submission, you're speaking of vulnerability, the opportunity to trust someone, to give more than yourself. And as for the power relation, I'm happily in love. I think it is rare for someone my age to fully confidently say that they're in a loving relationship, because the current, climate there's a lot of doubt when it comes to relationships and how transactional they are. So that full faith and belief that the relationship that you're in is indeed, governed by love, is a very rare thing to have. And when politicians and people in power constantly use the private sphere and invoke that for their political goals, it feels unfair for me to say that I can have my private life and think of it only apolitically, because everyone else seems to be taking it very politically, regardless of what country I'm from.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more remark. Striped sweater person. Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. I did want to, I agree with what everyone else has said, but as you kind of went on, you started to switch and like backtrack into this idea of mutual submission, but I would want to push against that a little bit because in your introduction, you only put the onus on women to enforce and reinforce masculinity. And also, I forget what excerpt it was, but it was from Shakespeare. But you also implied the sense of threat or harm or physical harm when the woman did not submit herself to a man. So I would just like to hear some of your thoughts about that.
Before we hear your thoughts, I just want to share. I think the way that you've entered this space is quite a shame because I have academic questions that I've written down after listening to you speak. Yeah. And because of how you've entered this space, there's no longer an opportunity for me to ask those questions because of the way that you've made everyone in the room feel. So instead, my question for you is, you've said multiple times already that you've come into this space purposely to provoke the crowd and to cause this reaction. And then later you backtracked and said that you simply wanted to represent your own reality of how you liked your relationships to work. And I found that backtracking and reversing what you had said was misleading because originally you said yourself, you came into this space to provoke us. And I really want to know what made you desire to come into a space like this and do that to the people in this room and make the people in this room feel in such a way where we have 17-year-olds feeling that we need to tell you what you're doing is painful to us.
Right. I'm not trying to cause pain. I'm talking about relationships in a way that to 20-25 years sound very patriarchal and things that we've moved away from is going to be provocative because we've moved away from Jane. It was, you mentioned it was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. That was Rochester talking about these things. So part of me, like, these are ideas that have been around for some centuries. And I don't want to simply dismiss them. There is some goodness in these notions of mutual submission. So it is, I've put it as like a personal essay, but I can very much sense, first of all, if you think, oh, she's a trad wife and she's submissive, look, I've come here and said things that are, for me, very joyful. How to live with joy. Well, you can have a private life world that dissolves these political concerns. It truly dissolves them inside of a marriage and a home, or a loving union and a home. So I'm not, it sounds, if Shakespeare's provocative, that's Shakespeare. If Charlotte Bronte is, you know what I mean? Like, this is, I don't want to apologize for Charlotte Bronte's writing.
So I want to point out that it's after 6.
Yeah.
If nothing else, we have an invigorated audience. And I think there have been, I think that we have heard a lot of important things said. There have been misunderstandings. There have been actual disagreements. And so I hope, even though I know a lot of you feel frustrated right now, that there will also be joy in continuing the conversation.